Hello and welcome to this edition of Talk to Al Jazeera with our special guest tonight, the Sudanese President Omar Hassan al Bashir. Mr. President, welcome and thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
شكرا جزيلا.
My first question is about the latest in Darfur. The latest serious attempt to solve the problem in Darfur through peace talks was in Sirte, Libya. Why did those talks fail?
الحقيقة طبعا نقدر نقول المباحثات فشلت.
The talks failed because some of the major leaders of the rebel groups did not show up in Sirte. Even some of those who attended have specifically said that they did not come to negotiate. Instead, they came only to attend the opening ceremony. The leaders who were absent, and those who showed up but weren't serious, there are some powers behind them who encouraged them to behave this way.
Some of those rebel factions say the reason why they did not attend the talks was that many invitees, many factions that were invited to Libya were not real factions. They were fictitious factions created by the government of Sudan in order to influence the talks and finally get the results that the Sudanese government wanted.
طبعا ده قول مردود. لأنه التحضير
This, of course, can be easily responded to. The preparations for the talks and inviting parties to Sirte, the government was not part of that. The government even facilitated communications for the brokers to get in touch with the commanders on the ground so that they can easily attend the talks, even crossing through cities that are under government control. We allowed the rebel commanders to gather in the city of Khartoum, which is a government city, and then go to Juba to unify their position. We offered everything possible to make the factions attend the talks. Some of the Darfur factions whose politicians are abroad have real presence on the ground and some don't. As for the commanders, some of them don't have a presence outside Sudan, but they are effective on the ground. So one cannot discount the importance of the factions that showed up in Sirte as insignificant, because they are the ones with real power on the ground, and they were invited by the African Union and the United Nations, not the government of Sudan.
Mr. Minni Minawi, who is your partner from the Abuja peace agreement, he's very unhappy. He complains of the government not implementing the Abuja peace agreement. If the Abuja peace agreement is not implemented, how can you add yet another agreement?
هي حقيقة دائما صوتهم هو العالي.
It's their complaints that are always heard. This agreement mentions very specific elements: power sharing, distribution of wealth, and security arrangements. When it comes to power sharing, they now occupy all the positions allocated to them. As for the distribution of wealth, two funds have been established, one for reconstruction and another for reparations. The security arrangements, which involve their troops merging into the armed forces and police, that has been obstructed by them. Delays in this area are what's delaying development, because there can be no development without security. They took the jobs and the money, but they don't want to fulfill their security obligations. Once they took power, they were supposed to gather their forces, count them and classify them. But this part of the agreement hasn't been implemented, and that's their peril.
The UN accuses the government of Sudan of obstructing the final composition of the hybrid force. Is that correct?
هو طبعا نحن مما وقعنا اتفاقية أبوجا.
After signing the Abuja peace agreement, there have been attempts to alter the mission of the AU troops into a United Nations mission, despite the fact that the Abuja agreement states that security is the responsibility of the African Union. We've been strongly resisting this until the Secretary General proposed a plan and we reached an agreement that the troops and leadership is African, but the support is from the United Nations in the shape of financial and logistical backing and through experts. Resolution number 1906 states that by August the 31st, all countries should present their contributions. The United Nations support should have come in the shape of 2 brigades of engineers. China offered one and Pakistan offered another, and we accepted that. The budget of this batch should have been approved by now, But suddenly, we're told that the engineers will come from Norway and Sweden. This is something we rejected, and we will continue to reject. We will not accept to have engineers from Norway and Sweden. There was no mention of these two countries. What we accepted was China and Pakistan. The other thing is, 8 infantry brigades were needed. African nations offered 16 until now. But then they started talking about troops from Thailand, which is something we rejected, because African nations already provided double the capacity required. The obstruction is from the United Nations and the other entities putting pressure on the Secretary General and the UN to get troops from outside Africa. Africa already provided the necessary troops.
Why do you object to the United Nations taking the leading role in peacekeeping in Darfur?
Because we have suspicions that there's another agenda. The United Nations was present when we signed the peace agreement in Abuja. The African Union was given the responsibility of security arrangements. Why now jump to talk of the United Nations troops, despite the fact that African forces served under the worst circumstances, when the war was at its height and before we had reached an agreement? So why now that there's an agreement, do they want to change the African role into United Nations one? It's our conviction that there's an agenda behind that.
The humanitarian organizations in Darfur say the government is crippling their activities in Darfur.
This is not true. We have signed agreements and we have a fast track to facilitate the job of these organizations. We have more than 200 organizations currently working in Darfur, with about 16,000 staff members, 2,500 of whom are foreigners. There are no obstacles, neither at customs nor in other locations. We just hear stuff in the media. It could happen that due to administrative mistakes that they do, some of their work is delayed. But they blame it all on the government. When we talk about the humanitarian situation in Darfur and its indicators, there is no famine in Darfur. There are no epidemics. All indicators related to malnutrition are more positive in Darfur than in any other place in Sudan. So what's the issue exactly?
Every now and then we hear of a UN official being expelled from Sudan. Jan Pronk was expelled, and 2 days ago another official was expelled in Niala.
We are an independent country. Those who respect the sovereignty and laws of the country, we respect them and honor them as guests. But those who cross the line and appoint themselves as the general ruler of Sudan, they have no place here. Jan Pronk started behaving as if he was the general ruler of Sudan. Those who work for organizations or even the United Nations and have suspicious relations and activities, we have to expel them.
There are also other accusations that the Sudanese government is making the life of the displaced people in Darfur difficult by trying to force them to go back to their villages or obstructing humanitarian aid reaching them.
We've already said that these camps do not suffer from famine or epidemics. All indicators of malnutrition there are more positive than the rest of Sudan, which means there's no problem there. We do not interfere in these camps. We speak of a voluntary return. We believe that these camps have turned into a show for people to come and watch, or for those who have elections in their countries to come and visit the camps in Darfur and go back to market that in the media. We want to put an end to the existence of these camps, but with the desire of the citizens. We didn't force anyone out of the camps, but we encouraged them and provide the same services they receive inside the camp, but back in their villages. It didn't happen that we forced anyone through the police to go back. That never happened.
What are you seriously trying to do to see the problem in Darfur resolved?
حاجات اللي احنا عملنا كله هو ممكن. احنا كان ممكن المشكلة دي.
We did all we can. We could have put an end to this problem militarily. We had no problem doing that, but despite the victory of the armed forces, we agreed to talk and to be patient. We are represented in the negotiations through very senior officials. In Abuja, for example, we had 5 ministers there. This shows all our keenness. In Sirte, we also sent a highly senior delegation with full authority, and we announced a unilateral ceasefire. All this to show how serious we are, because we are the ones affected by this problem. We are the ones paying the price for the continuation of the crisis in Darfur, and the only losers. Sudan's enemies are the ones who are benefiting.
One of the criticisms against the government of Sudan dealing with the rebellions in Sudan in general is that you talk only to those who carry arms. You talk only to those who take up arms for their rights, to defend their rights. But you neglect others, the majority, the silent majority that is disgruntled and poor, but they are not carrying arms.
احنا طبعا كل الناس واصلنا.
We reach out to everyone. All areas of Sudan are represented. We applied the federal system in Sudan. We have 26 states, each with its own constitutional, legal and financial jurisdiction, so that people work in and develop their own regions. We've given people the chance to share power. For example, when we talk about Darfur after independence, those who participated in the federal government were only 5. At the time when the rebellion started in Darfur, there were 6 ministers in the federal government from Darfur. And in addition to the 3 Darfur governors, 2 other governors were also from Darfur. We involved people even before they asked for it. We gave them the power and the jurisdiction before they asked for it. We started development projects before they asked for it. Before the rebellion in Darfur, there were only 11 high schools in Darfur. By the time the rebellion started, there were 195 high schools in Darfur, in addition to 3 universities. In 2003, the year when the rebellion kicked off, we had contracts with 24 companies for different water projects in Darfur. So, we were taking care of services and development before we were asked to. When people take up arms, there are 2 choices. There's the mindset that if someone carries weapons, he's considered a terrorist and should be dealt with through force. There are others who prefer the peaceful solution, which is cheaper and saves lives. The latter is the predominant direction.
In your showdown with the United Nations and the United States about Darfur, do you feel supported and emboldened by your friendship, your partnership with China?
والله احنا طبعا يعني بنقول انه احنا وجدنا دعم حقيقي من
We've received tangible support from China. When there was a Security Council resolution proposed by Britain, we had the support of China, Russia, Qatar, and a number of African nations. It's this that's enabled us to alter this resolution into the form we now have accepted. Some say we should even have more support from China, because we're being targeted by the United States because we allowed China into the Sudanese oil that was discovered by and licensed for American companies. Some Americans explicitly say Sudanese oil belongs to us, not China. The Chinese involvement in Sudan is an additional reason prompting the United States' enmity to us.
Before leaving this issue, do you think that the international interest in Darfur is driven by something other than humanitarian purposes?
Absolutely. The humanitarian aspect isn't the issue in Darfur. There are areas in Africa that are much worse than Darfur. Somalia, for example. There's no comparison between Somalia and Darfur. In Congo, the United Nations speaks of millions of people being killed there. There's no comparison between what's happening there and what happened in Darfur. These are all pretexts, just like the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It was a pretext to ultimately control oil in Iraq. Talk of a humanitarian situation in Darfur is just a pretext.